This is the project that we're going to make today. This one is done in this size journal, but you can do it in any, you can adapt it to do work in other size journals. There's also this large journal, opening that direction, and I'm actually going to work in this size today just to show you how to adapt it to both sizes. So whichever one you've got is going to work. So sometimes what I do is actually take the pages out of my journal to work on them, and then when I'm done, just use tape and put them back in. So that's what I've done with this particular one today. So we'll show you how it can be adapted from this size or this size project, whichever size journal that you're working in. And before we get started, I'll just give you a sneak peek at other virtual art journaling classes that you can take through Scran Bean. We'll flip through. There's one you can take. The books give us some place to go when we have to stay where we are. That's a nice vintage one. There's just kind of a silly one. Life is too short to be normal, so stay weird. This one, we've already got a journal up on that one, or a video. And then there's this one here of Bloom, the beautiful process of becoming. I love that quote. So that's a fun page too. But today, the one we're working on is this one here. And if you don't have a kit to complete it, the kits are available at scrapandbean.com. So let's get started. As I mentioned, I sometimes take the pages out of my journal, and that's what I have done with this one. So I'm just going to tape them together. This is just regular old masking tape, and sometimes I even do this when I leave the pages in the journal, because if I'm working with a medium that's very wet and it tends to run through that seam and get onto other pages, I don't always like that to happen. So I do sometimes just put this down the seam of my page even when I'm leaving it in my book. So up to you if you want to do that step or not. It's not necessary. It's just a tip. And mine's a little bit wrinkly there, and that's okay. It's just going to add some texture. One thing about art journaling is it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm not framing it to go on the wall, so it's just for my own pleasure. So it allows me the freedom to play and not be disappointed when I have a lack of perfection. So the first step here, I'm going to put actually a craft mat underneath because I'm going to get some paint out. So the first step I'm going to do is paint this border. And what I've used is this fresco finish. It's a chalk paint, which I love working with, especially in journals. And I'm using the color Tinned Peas. But you could use any color of paint or acrylic paint, whatever, even a spray, anything that you've got that you just want it to match our project. So the green obviously goes, you could pick up some of the yellows, or brown even would work. A red from like the berries, that would even look nice. And what I'm doing, because I'm going to glue this on top, if I put this rice paper onto a light surface like this, the very light color behind it, you can see it looks quite different than, let's say, if I put a black underneath it. Now it makes it very dark. And I like it being light so that the design shows up more. So in order to keep that light color behind it, I am just going to paint around the rim and making a border so that the behind here will stay the light color of my mixed media paper, and I'm just framing it with this green paint. And don't need to be exact. If it goes a little bit farther underneath, or if you cover the whole page, it's all good. We're here to have fun, not to be perfect. So I may have to, I don't know if I can scoot that back at all. Nope, that's as far back as it's going to go. So we'll show you here. I'm just going to use a wide brush, any wide flat brush you've got, or even a wedge brush. It's going to work. Take out some paint there. Load up my brush. And I'm just going to paint this border around the edge. And you can see I'm not measuring or doing anything exact there. I just know that I want a border. It's going to be a little more than 1 inch. Chalk paint, if that happens to be the brand of, whoa, I didn't mean to put out that much. If you're using chalk paint, you will see that it dries very quickly, so you really don't even have to heat your paint to get it to dry. It's just going to air dry for you as you go around. And I'm not even worried about having like a second coat, or if I've got brush marks in there. It all just adds to the texture of our project. And if you didn't have a paint, you could see where you could just add a spray around the edge, and that would work too. We're just basically adding a border of some color. So there we go. And I just put my thumb in it, so that works too. Alrighty, on to our next step. So for our next step, we're going to add some stamping, and I happen to have a text stamp here that is it's writing that you just can't read. It's illegible writing. If you don't have some kind of a background text stamp, you could even use a sentiment stamp. It doesn't matter if you can read the word, because we're just going to stamp on the edge, so you're not going to see the whole word anyways. So even a stamp that you have that has legible words on it, once you put it on here and only see portions of the words, it's going to work too. So whatever stamp you have that's got some nice lettering or blurred lettering on it is going to work. I happen to be using this Memento. I'm going to put brown ink is what I'm going for, because black is a little bit too drastic for this project. We've got a lot of brown on here. You could use Distress Ink Vintage Photo. Now, if you did not use chalk paint, but you used acrylic and it's high gloss, then you're going to want to use a different ink to stamp on top of it. Something like Adirondack ink or StazOn ink, because just something like Distress Ink, where it's a water-based on top of a high gloss surface, doesn't really dry and it's just going to keep smearing on you. So depending what you used for paint. Now when you use, like I did here, chalk paint, you can put anything on it, anything. All the inks are going to work. It's one thing I love about the chalk paint. It just gives you so many possibilities. So thinking one step ahead, our erase paper is going to cover, and we're just going to see this border around the edge. So when I stamp, I don't care what happens underneath here. I'm not going to see it. I'm just a little bit on the edge is what's going to show. So I show you that just so that we know it's okay to be messy. So I'll stamp up my stamp and just do some random stuff. And I'm not at all worried about getting a good precise stamp. I've got blank areas. I have letters here where only portions of the letters came out, and that's perfect. We're just getting that little bit of a look of some writing going on randomly. Doesn't have to be everywhere, just pieces of it. In fact, I think it looks better if it isn't everywhere. But I am going to do it on all 4 sides. So we'll do a little bit on the top here. There. Great. So just one quick simple step and it'll add a little bit something to our project. So here we go with our rice paper. So many things you can do with rice paper. This is just one of them, is to create a background. So I'm working in this bigger journal, and I am going to trim my rice paper down to the size that's going to work for me here. If you're working in a page like this where it's shorter, then you're obviously going to have a lot more left over. Like here, I trimmed it about here. Cut it off. You do want to make sure you have this bird nest in there, because that's a feature on our, we're going to have little eggs in there. That's a feature on our project, so you're going to make sure you save that one. So when I'm doing this, it's going to be the extra I'm taking off the top. And I want it to be torn, not cut. I don't want these nice straight sizes, so I'm going to tear it. And with this rice paper, And to tear it makes it really easy if you get it wet right where you want to tear. So I've dipped my paintbrush just in water, and I'm going to get the edge here wet. On this bottom edge, I don't necessarily want to make it any shorter. I just want to get that torn edge look instead of it being a straight cut edge. So I get it nice and moist there. And then I start to tear at it. So I'm just tearing enough away here. So I'm just pulling it apart. I'm not tearing it like this direction like you might paper. I'm just pulling the edge away. So it's going to be very uneven. And you'll see as you tear it that you start getting these little fibers sticking out here. Just makes a really interesting edge. So that's one of the things I really like about rice paper is that you get these little fibers coming out of there. And if you get moving along and your paper is drying out on you, just add some more water. It can take a fair amount of water because it's quite a different substrate than just paper. And I'm trying to not take too much off the bottom. I just want that torn design. So once you have your rice papers trimmed around 3 sides the way you want, and then the middles are ready to meet right on the seam of your art journal page, we're ready to glue them down. And my favorite glue for art journaling or any of this type of thing is this multi-matte medium. And one of the reasons is if your glue sneaks out and it's over the top of your project, it's still okay. It's not going to dry sticky, and this one is matte, so not only is it not going to be sticky, but it won't be a high gloss on there. Multi-matte medium. And spread that where it's going to go on your art journal, so basically in all of this white area. Now, my goal is to get it right up to the edge so that this edge is glued down nice and tight. If these edges where we have this nice looking, it looks like it's frayed, if some of that isn't glued down right to the edge, I like that. So I like it if it's got a little bit kind of even sticking up or curled there. Perfect. So I'm not worried about going right to the very edge of it. So I'm just going to put glue just beyond the edge of where my paint goes there. And I'm going to do one side at a time. So I'm going to put that on there nice and liberally. And make sure that it's everywhere. I'm just trying not to have any air pockets. Better to have a little too much than not enough. And if it goes beyond where my paint is and you can see it a little bit, that's okay too. So there's one, and actually I'll put a little bit over the edge here just to make sure if it sneaks over, I'm still got glue on there. And then you can see where, because we got the edges wet, this actually isn't 100% flat anymore. It's kind of curled a little bit at the edges, and when we put it down, there's a chance we're going to get some wrinkles on there, and that's okay too. A little bit of texture. If you are gluing not only this, but even if you're gluing paper down onto where it's nice wet glue like that, and you don't want it to get too many wrinkles, then a little tip is to spray it with water, like not soaking, but just a little. No, my sprayer's probably not. Just have a little moisture. So now you're putting something moist, this paper, into something moist instead of something dry into something moist. And that can help it to not get quite so wrinkly, save you a little bit of that shrinkage going on. So I'm just trying to get this close to where I want it, roughly centered, and put that seam right on the edge, and that's where it's going to go. Once you lay it down, there's not a whole lot of movement because that's a lot of glue there. And I'm just going to press it out with my fingers, starting from one area and then working out all directions. You could use like a credit card to put it down. Just go gentle on it so you're not tearing anything. You could use a brayer to lay it down, but you can also just use your hands. That That works just fine. There we go. And you can see where my edges are sticking up, and I'm okay with that. I like that kind of a look. I probably should have pulled it down a little bit farther to center it, but that's okay. So now we'll move over to this side and put a generous amount of matte medium over there as well. I may have too much on my brush here. That's a lot, but that's okay. We'll work with it. And I'm going to go right up to the edge of the other piece. In fact, just in case they overlap a little bit, I'm going to put some matte medium just over the edge there. Nice thing about matte medium is if you find that you didn't go quite as close to the edges as you wanted, you can always lift the edge of your rice paper and take your brush and sneak a little bit underneath there too. So it's kind of forgiving. Now I do want to make sure I have this going the right direction. There's some text in the background, so I want to make sure I've got that going the right way up. And I'm roughly going to have it equal to where this adjoining page is. Get those pretty close to. I'd rather have it slightly overlap than to have a gap in between. I don't care for that look of a gap, because then you see your white page in the background. So we'll get that laid down as close as I can. And then I'm just, oh, and you know what? I forgot to spray it. So let's just, my sprayer's not working that good here. Okay, well, we'll show you what happens when you don't spray it. I may have a little more tendency for it to get some wrinkles, and actually it hasn't, so it's working. Yeah, it's working great. There we go. Okay, so here's the difference in not spraying it. I can see that this is like shrunk a little bit. I'd really like my sprayer to work. And it is just not pumping for me. Okay, so we'll just go without. And there we go. Now I'm going to let that dry a little bit, because the glue is wet. And so I'll set that aside to dry. And then we can take out our next, change my work surface here. Our next step is going to be to cut out, we're going to get our birds ready. So these two little birds. And you've got the pattern in here. So here's one bird and here's another. And you've got some papers here to cut those out on. And this pattern will tell you. So you cut this out of yellow, you cut this out of blue. These are out of yellow, blue, white, yellow. Anyways, you'll see that. And here's our papers. So two ways that you can do this. One is you can take your scissors and cut a piece out, then lay it on your paper and trace it with a pencil and cut it out. The other way you can do is by taking a piece of graphite paper or even carbon paper. Graphite paper is really nice to work with, because then you can always make erase marks. And take your piece, like this one here is white. Maybe I'll take one of these yellow ones. So here's a yellow one. We're going to cut it out of yellow paper. I'm going to do it up at the edge so that I don't waste a bunch of paper. Put my graphite between it. And then just trace through it. And that just saves me one layer of cutting. And it also saves me my pattern so that I can use this for a bird embellishment on another project, whether it's a scrapbook page, a card, a tag, anything. So there you've got it traced out. And then you just cut your piece. And if some of your trace marks show, that's okay. If you're using graphite paper, you can always just erase it because it's like pencil lead there. If you're using carbon paper, it might smear on you, so I just leave them. But we're going to ink all the edges anyways, so you're not going to see that little bit that's on there. So we'll just take, I'm using brown ink. I happen to be using Distress ink of the Walnut Stain, but you can use any brown ink, any brand, shade of brown that you want. And I'll just ink up those edges all the way around. And there you have your piece. So you just follow that with a pattern of all of these, and then we'll assemble them together. So just finish cutting up our pieces here onto my last little yellow portion of the bird. And you'll notice that on some pieces, like this, these are one of the bird's legs. There's no cut line at the top. It's beyond this, doesn't really matter how long you go. You can see I've left mine a little bit longer because these feet they're going to be tucked in underneath your bird, so it's just the feet and the bottom of the legs that are going to show. So I've just cut mine a little bit longer there. And when you are doing fussy cutting, it's so much easier and more comfortable if you have a set of good scissors. These go to a very sharp blade, really sharp blade, like to a sharp point. There are also titanium blades, so I've never had to sharpen them. They just stay sharp. And look at how large the handle is. So my hands go in there. I can cut for a long time, and nothing is binding on my hands. In fact, the scissors themselves have a little bit of a give to them, so there really isn't any pressure point on my hand at all. And I have found when suggesting these to other crafters that if people that have arthritis or have any kind of hand problems, that helps a little bit too. If you have a pair of scissors where this spot where you put your hand is a nice big hole and then there's no tight binding on your hand. And I'm a person, I like to fussy cut. I just find it really relaxing. So with this type of a scissor, I can cut for a long time. And I never get sore hands from cutting, which is quite nice. So important to have a good set of scissors. Any scissors work, but a good set of scissors are easy on your hands. And that sharp point allows me to go into these tiny little areas, and it doesn't rip the paper beyond where I actually cut. The other thing you can do too is I'll go in like this. So I'm really using just this portion of the scissor rather than the very tip. And I just cut in only so far and then stop. So if you have a pair of scissors that doesn't go to a sharp point, then you just want to use the this wider part of the blade instead of going right in with the tip of your scissor. So just a couple little tips there. And then ink up all of your edges. I like the look of inking your edges, especially with brown. That just seems to work with everything. I do that a lot when I'm scrapbooking too, especially if I'm layering with many different papers that perhaps don't always come from the same design line. It helps to tie them together when you just ink all the edges with the same color. So here's all my pieces. Now my next thing I'm going to do is actually build those little birds. Okay, so we're going to start building our birds, and if I can slide this one onto the camera. Here's our first little bird on the right hand page, and here's our cutout pieces. So we're going to start with this white body of the bird, layer this yellow one on top, and I like to layer it dry first, which just means not any glue on there, so that we can visualize how it's going to go. And there's going to be that feather, and then this head, when you put this head on, Now you have a yellow beak and you have the yellow body. And if if things don't line up 100%, like maybe your yellow is showing, like if I adjusted this, so now there'd be a little bit of yellow peeking out here. Don't worry about that. Like, glue it as close as you can, and then afterwards you can go on if there's, and just trim off a little. If they weren't both traced and cut exactly, we can do a little bit of adjustments to that too. So that's what our bird's going to be like. And then these legs. Now the legs I'm not going to attach until I'm actually ready to put him down on the branch, so that I can adjust the angle of the legs so that it makes it look like he's actually got his feet onto the branch. So I'll just layer this part of the body together like we have that bird on there. And then this second bird, we're going to have our blue body with a nice yellow feather on there. And his beak is just going to be this piece here. You'll notice on the diagram there's a dotted line. So that dotted line is just showing you everything above that dotted line is going to be underneath his body. So that's just his little triangle beak is going to poke out there. And then with his legs, same thing. I'm not going to glue them on until I'm ready to set him on the branch so that he can actually have his feet onto the branch. So for now, we'll just glue these bird parts together. And we can use some matte medium for that as well. And I'll use maybe a little bit smaller of a brush. Nice thing about matte medium, if you don't have matte medium, you could use a glue stick for this as well. You're just layering pieces together, but I find that matte medium is really nice to work with, and it's great for collages and so many different things that you're gluing into a journal that it's handy to have. And then once you have it, you might as well be using it. So you can position his little feather wherever you like, but I'm going to put it there. And then his little beak. I can pick that up. I'm actually going to put the glue under him there. And then position his little beak and let that dry. So there's one guy ready to go, and then this one, we'll kind of unassemble him here. So that's going to be the bottom. This is going to be our next layer, so we'll glue this one together. Now his beak is sticking out beyond that, so I'm not putting glue on there yet. Otherwise that's going to be exposed glue and it'll just be a sticky piece to work with. So we'll get that glued on. I hope you guys are enjoying the carnival. Those that are watching this when it is going live during the virtual carnival. Shout out to those girls at Creative Scrapbooker Magazine. They are the energy behind the carnival when it's live, and the ones that made it happen virtually when we couldn't do it live. So big shout out to them for getting this going. There, we got one layer on there. So our next thing was going to be his little wing. Gave him an alternate color wing just so he's a colorful little guy there. And I'm pretty generous with that glue. And we'll have his wing go something like that. It doesn't have to be perfect because every bird is different, right? So your bird could be different than mine. The thing about art journaling is I try to keep it very relaxed. We're not going for perfection. We're going for the pleasure of creating. And then just fit the round of his head should fit the round of that yellow head. And like I said, if it doesn't fit perfectly, we'll just trim him after. It's all going to work out. There he goes. So now we can take out our branches. So you have two die cut pieces of branches. that happen to have little birds on them. This is from an older Tim Holtz die cut that I made those for you. And because we don't need the bird that's on there, we are just going to chop that little bird right off. And you can always save that for another project too. You want a little bird on something, and we're going to take that right off that edge. So we can set those aside for a different project. And now these branches, you can trim them shorter or have them longer, however you want. And I do have one going on this side of the page and one going on this side of the page. Now my objective was to cover up this bird that's on the paper. You can see it. Where is it? Yeah, this little guy here. If you like that bird on there, I didn't want it because his size proportion was different than what we're going for. So I wanted this bird to mostly cover that up and hide it. If you want that bird to show there, then you just shift your branch wherever you'd like it to go. So I have a branch off each side, and if you don't want them to look the same, turn one upside down. That works. And you can have it going all the way onto your page, or you can have it going as far back as you want and chop it off whatever sticks out from your page. So before I get too far ahead of gluing, before I glue that branch down for sure, I want to get out my music notes that are going to go kind of along with that branch. And I like to lay things out so I know where I'm going to space it all before I glue it down. So I've taken out my sentiments here, and it does come with music notes above and below the quote. To me, that was maybe a little bit too many musical notes, so I decided I'm going to cut the music notes off the top. So I'm saving the quote, and I'm just cutting off that upper music notes. Of course, you can leave them there if you want, or you could cut all the music notes off. It's your project to decide how you want to adjust that. So there's one, and these you could always add someplace else because it's nice little bar music there. And I love this quote. This is so nice. The wording is so nice. So there's those pieces off, and music gives soul to the universe, wings to the mind. I'm even going to cut it here right where the little comma is, so I can fit it on my piece a little bit better. And I'll cut this one as well. And then, of course, before I glue it down, I'm going to ink the edges on all of that as well, making it brown. But here we can start to do a little bit of layout. So my birds with no feet on them yet, so it gives me some opportunity to adjust. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down my branches. So when I say glue down, I'm using matte medium again. And if I put some paper towel here, then I can just be generous and messy. Oh, that makes it so much easier. So a very liberal amount. I don't want anything dry behind that branch. And actually, I should have inked up the edges of that branch before I glued it down, but I didn't, so this one's not going to have it. And it's brown, so it's okay. You just gotta let it go how it's made. It'll happen the way it's meant to be. And now this one. We're going back something like that. And I'm not concerned with this sticking over the page because I can chop off the excess later. And this little guy's feet, now I want him to be able to put his feet on the branch so that he's, you know, not just dancing on one foot. I want both feet on the branch. Something like that. Oh, that looks like almost natural, like his little toes are curling around there. I think like that, that's going to work for me. So, before I lose position too much, I really like how those little feet went on there. It's like his little feet are just hanging onto the branches. So, fix that up with some glue. Get his little feet adjusted back on there again. And I don't know if you can see on camera where I've got a little bit of glue gushing out on there. And you know what? It's okay. When this stuff is on the top, it's not going to dry sticky. It's going to dry matte and dried out. So it'll be perfect. I will get another piece of paper towel to work on here. So all of the tools and materials that we used in this project are things that I very typically use in a lot of my art journal projects. So if you do art journaling, these are things that you can use over and over again. Matte medium I use anytime I'm putting layers on my page. So we'll just get him on there again. And he's going something like that. Hold him down. Now if I find that any of it isn't really sticking, and this one, it is, he's stuck everywhere. If he wasn't really sticking, you can take your paintbrush with your matte medium on it and just tuck it underneath where it isn't sticking and then put him back down again. It works quite well for that. So this guy here now, let's put his branch first, and I kind of want this music over the branch. And I'd like my end to end right at one of these keys. So I'll just trim that a little bit. And, oh, I want to ink. Don't forget, Kathy, I want to ink the edges. Especially if something where it's a lighter color like this. And you notice our little birdies don't have eyes yet. So we're going to take a black pen and just color in some eyes. And there's... Is that too tipped? No, I think that's... His legs should go mid-body kind of, longer legs. Okay, we're going to put them there. That's where you're going, little fella. But I will wait until all that matte medium is good and dry before I take a pen and just put little dots for eyes on there. So another thing that we're going to do is add some music notes. In your kit, you have some little brads like this. You should have 3 of them. Some will be this, I'm not a musician, so I don't know, but where you got 2 notes hooked together and one's a single. Hopefully somebody with music can add in the comments there. What do you really call that? And if you have a paper piercer, which I have in my little magical bag here, I'll have to dig through my stash. I've got one of those real sharp pokey tools someplace in my magic bag that has everything I need in it. So here we go. It's in there. Everything is, that's like my bottomless bag. It's just, everything is in there. So I have glued right to my work surface. Let's cut that off. There we go. So you can position your music notes wherever you want them. And I kind of want the music rise in here. So wherever the back of my brad is, I'm just going to pierce a hole. If you don't have a nice sharp tool like that, you can use a thumbtack too. You might have to put it in and then wiggle a little bit so that this will go through there. And then just spread this little wings apart on the other side. There actually is a tool available that does that. Spreads those and presses them down for you. And where do we want our other music? Somewhere around here. So I'll put in another one there. I like things to be in odd numbers. So I have the music notes going in 3s. I know our bird isn't because we got 2 birds going there, but it's just how much room there was for it. Okay, and then another music note, what, floating over here, floating. I don't want them to look too lined up. So, maybe just right here. And the other side, you can spread that apart. If you need it to go down flat, press it down with something a little heavier. And I'm probably going right off camera, am I? There we go. So there's our music notes. Now, if you already have something on this side of the page and you don't want your brads to show, you could just cut those little tail ends off, and then you would need to glue these down. But because they're metal and those little that little brad, that's going to hold them in there really, really well. So I like to use that. So this, I'm going to ink these up, and then we're going to attach our sentiment. So I hope that you guys are really enjoying this virtual carnival, or if you are watching this later, the recorded version, and you missed the carnival, make sure you watch out for next year. Next year we should be able to meet in person instead of virtually, so that'll be awesome. But you know what? I'm really, really glad that those gals from Creative Scrapbooker magazine were willing to go to all the effort and all of the tech things that they had to do to figure out how to make this work virtually, so we could all get together as best we can. And actually, I noticed we mailed out kits to right across Canada and throughout several of the states from the United States. So there's people joining us that generally wouldn't be able to. So when you go to glue these down, you obviously want to make sure you got your words going so that the sentiment is still making sense. So it's music, gives soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight, oh, got these backwards, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. Love that sentiment. And I'm just going to put back to my favorite art journaling adhesive here, multi-matte medium. Put that on there generously. And if you're concerned about it being straight, you can always use a ruler. But I generally like to eyeball things. Sometimes I'm sorry for it afterwards, but that's generally how I do it. Okay, but I want to make sure I got the words going right here. This is the next one, right? Somebody stop me if I'm putting the words out of order. Okay, here we go. And I'm just kind of taking this edge here and roughly lining those up. So it's just easy to read still. Flight to the imagination. Okay, make sure these are in the right order because screw glue is fairly strong. Once you get it pressed down there, it would be hard to get it back up without tearing something. So here we go. Flight to the imagination. And then these edges I'm going to line up as well, or roughly get them lined up anyways. I'm not ruler perfect, I'm just eyeball perfect. Well, not even perfect, just eyeball acceptable. Okay, so roughly there. If you're really concerned that you're not going to be able to get them even close to straight, put them on an angle on purpose that solves a lot of things. So there we go. I'm going to trim off this excess. Trim off the excess on this side. And our little birds need some eyes. So I go back into my magic bag, and guess what? I have a black marker. So for their eyes, I mean, you can make just a, you know, a round circle. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to do a circle, but leave like a hole in the middle, I guess you would say. Okay, so there's the start of my eyeball. Just the round circle. And then I'm taking my marker and I'm going to make it a little bit thicker, but not fill it all the way in until I feel like, yeah, that looks like a bird's eye. So if you want, you can fill it all in, but I like it like this where it's still a circle and it's got a little bit of light color. There you go. I'm trying to make you dizzy there, it seems like. And on this other side as well. So where their eye goes is kind of proportionate to where the beak is, right? So this guy's same. Do a circle. And then I'm just going to take my marker and make that line of the circle a little bit thicker, until it's the size that I want. And he's got that beady little hole in the middle. I think that having that little center empty just gives them a little, makes it look like there's some life in their eyes. And now we get to work with our clay. And the clay is so fun. It's so easy to work with, and that's why I wanted to incorporate it in this. I know it's just a tiny little bit of the project is clay. And here you'll have it in a bag. And this does not air dry. So even if you've had it out and looked at it and felt it and didn't seal up your bag, it's still okay. And you've got more clay in the kit than what you actually need for 3 little small eggs. So don't think that dividing this into 3 is going to give you your eggs. Here it's bigger eggs. Because I'm putting in an art journal, I didn't want it super bulky. I don't mind having a little bit of bulk there, but I don't want it super bulky. So I made my eggs actually quite small. And I just do like you would play with clay when you're a kid and just roll it around in your hand and it kind of makes it into a circle. So I've got a circle, and then I'm thinking, okay, I need my egg to be a little bit bigger. And you can play with this. It's not going to harden on you. It needs to get heated to actually harden. So you got time. You could let it sit out for an hour and you're still going to be good. So now I have my circle, except we know eggs aren't a circle. They're more of an oval, right? So then I'm just going to roll it one way, and then I'm just going to kind of curve it over. Now it's a little bit more like an oval, and you just work it and shape it like you did Play-Doh as a kid until it's more like an egg shape. And then I'm going to set it on my little nest there. And I'm setting it down, the placement, so that I'm planning on covering up the picture of the egg. And my next 2 eggs, I want them to be roughly about the same size. I mean, they don't need to be exact. I don't know if every egg that a bird lays would be exactly the same size, but they're probably close. So I go back, roll it around till I get my circle. Then I roll it back and forth, so now it's more like a tube, like you're going for a spaghetti noodle or something, but not quite that. And then I'm just kind of playing with it till I get something more oblong than a circle, so it looks more like egg shape. And that's pretty good. And I'm not squishing it down on my page yet. I'm just laying it there lightly until I've got my 3 eggs. And I'm doing 3 because I like it to be an uneven number. I just think that's kind of pleasing to the eye. I think that egg might be a little bit small. Now you see all this ink on my fingers, and some of the ink is going into the clay, and you know what? That's okay. So roll it a bit, get rid of the circle so it's more like an egg shape. Okay. And now that I have them, I can play around until I kind of get the placement where I want. So you don't really notice so much the picture of the egg in the background. And there we go. Now, before I heat it, I do want to make sure, as I've been moving this around, I may have stuck my fingernail in there to move it. Any of those dents I want to get out, because whatever shape you have it now, when you heat it, it is going to harden exactly like that. So if you need to do any kind of finishing up, redoing, resizing, any of that, now's the time. If you got any fingernail marks in there that you want to get out, now's the good time for that. Okay, and now I've got it exactly how I want it. So this little piece of clay I have left, I could make another egg or whatever. I'm going to put that in there. And I do want to show you gals some other things that I have done with clay to show you that there's options. Of course, we have a few more things on display in the store, but here's on an art journal cover. This is all clay and it's pretty thick, but when it's on the cover, it's fine. You can see there how thick that is. So that's a lot of clay here, and taken some tools and made dents in it to make it, give it some texture. And then when it's done, it was painted with alcohol inks, and then even took a black marker and just made some lines and doodles on it. So that's one idea with clay. Here's another idea I've done with clay, and this is inside of an art journal. Now, I don't know if I can get this all to show on film because it's a big page. This here where I did a dragon. He's so big that his wing has to come out. But on his eyeball here, that was attached. This is all clay. And it's been colored with alcohol inks. And also on his little toes here and his claws. So this was all alcohol ink, and this was some pearl drops I put on top of his feet, and more feet down here because he's hanging on the edge of the page. So there's just a couple of ideas of what else you can do with your clay. And of course you can do some 3D things with your clay as well. So we'll just put that guy away. Oops. And now look what I did. I squished one of my little bird eggs. Okay, so you just got to reshape it and redo it. Once you have heated these, then you no longer have to worry about them changing in shape. They won't squish anymore. So to heat these, you do not want to be touching them while you have the heat gun on them. They get very, very hot. And even when you take the heat gun away from them, please do not be tempted to touch it to see how hot it is. It will burn your fingers. It gets very hot. So the way that we do this, and I actually heat it right into my journal. You don't have to. You could heat it on a different surface and then glue them into your journal. But when I heat it right into my journal, it binds it right to the surface, and I'm done. So when you go to heat it, I use a heat gun, a heat tool, I guess I should call it. And I heat it until you see the clay start to turn white. So the clay, the color of it right now is kind of more of an ivory color, and it's going to turn white. You might even see a little bit of what looks like smoke rising from it. So when you see either of those signs, the smoke or the turning white, shut the heat source off. Where you've heated it to that degree, even after your heat is shut off, the heat will continue to go through on all the clay as long as they're touching each other. So all these 3 eggs are touching. The heat will travel through all of them, and it's curing it as it goes. So you really just need the heat to get it started and then let it continue on its own. So here we go. And I'm going to let this run in real time so that it gives you an idea of how much time or how little time it actually takes for that to happen. And maybe we can even zoom in on it. There we go. So it'd be a good idea to actually, you know, get your gun warmed up away from it and then put it on when it's good and hot. But I can already see, okay, it's starting to go white. So I don't know if you can see that on film, but the center of those eggs, and there's a little puff of like smoke coming off of there. With any luck, that'll show up on the camera. But if you didn't see it, you'll see it on yours in real life. I just have like one stripe here where the egg is whiter. And so I know that that heat is starting to travel through there. And then I'll just let it sit and it'll cure as it goes. This is amazing clay. This is the quick dry clay from Ranger. And I just love working with it because I can leave it open on my desk. I can start a 3D item with it and leave it sit overnight, and it does not dry out. It doesn't harden until you actually put that heat source on it. So if you're really curious, because I am, right? See, I can't even poke it with this. It's hard. It's hard already. So just that quickly. But I still would not, I don't know if that showed up on camera or if I was off camera or off the screen. So even, yeah, all of that, the whole thing is hard now. I still wouldn't touch it with my finger because it's going to take a while for that to cool off. So I'm going to let that cool off, and then we'll come back on and we're actually going to paint these. So you can get ready whatever color paint you would like your eggs to be. I'm going to do mine with a light blue, and then I'm actually going to put some speckles on it too, because that just makes it more interesting, I think. Okay, so I'm ready to paint my little eggs there. Those cute little bird eggs. I'm going to use the distress paint called Speckled Egg, because I just thought that was appropriate for a bird egg. You could use almost anything on painting your clay. You could use any paint, obviously, or alcohol inks, or you could use a marker, a felt tip marker, a Sharpie. Spray would be a little hard because you're going to get overspray, but kind of anything that you can paint onto there. So basically go through your stash, find some medium that is the color that you want your eggs, and use that to paint on there. So even if it's an alcohol ink, you can take your alcohol ink and then just paint it on with a brush. So I'm going to use a very fine brush. I'll just squeeze out a little bit of... It's a new bottle, and I bet you there's a seal underneath there. Is there? Yes, there is. So the amount of paint I'm going to need, I can probably get it right off of this seal here. This clay just takes color so nicely. I often use alcohol ink on it. So that gives it a nice finish. But it's just really easy to work with, these clays. So you can make jewelry or embellishments. You can put it into the molds, like Prima has a lot of molds for different kind of clays. You could use this clay right in there as well. Or you can do like we did in the projects I showed you, where it's just been shaped by hand. So it's a lot of fun to play with. And it comes in couple different size bags, so if you just want a small bag of clay to start with, or if you've used it a few times and you know you like it. So there we go, we got blue eggs. just with that tiny, tiny little bit of paint. So the other thing I want to do is put some specks on my eggs, because to me that makes it looks more natural. Now, if you're a bird expert, you're you probably know what color the eggs should be. I'm just going by, you know, these are art journal eggs. So I want to put some little specks on there, and so I'm going to take some brown paint and splatter it. I like using this Tim Holtz splatter brush, but for this tiny little bit, I mean, you could use a paintbrush, an old toothbrush, anything to just get some little flicks of splatter on there. But and you could splatter everything, have some little brown specks everywhere. Even in our design, we've got some specks and some green specks, so that would work okay. But I don't want to have a lot of specks anywhere other than my eggs, so I'm going to take some paper towel. I'm going to poke a hole in there that's roughly about the size of my egg. So I just basically have a hole on there, and I'm treating that kind of like a mask around my eggs. Then I'll take my paint here. Any paint you want in the color that you want. You could have white specks on it, black specks on it, darker blue specks. Put a little bit on my splatter brush. And I'll just keep splatting it until it gets a look that I'm happy with. Oh, these are looking like they just came out of the nest in the tree. I'm loving it. Looks like I'm doing a lot, but I hardly have any paint on my brush, so there's really very little bit coming off of there. But it's enough that I am liking it. So there you go. Take off our little mask, and perfect. It just got on the eggs and nothing on the back. Our birdies with their little eyes. This one singing with his music notes. So thank you so much, crafters, for joining me for this project. And if you have enjoyed that and want to do some more, we have a video of this on YouTube under the channel of Scran Bean. And then to buy, the video's free to view. If you want to have all of the supplies that I have in here, including the sentiments, then or the quote, then we have that for sale at scrapbean.com under the kit for this books page. And we have a couple more that either I'll have videos or I will have them eventually. This one I hope to have on a class coming up soon, but I haven't quite got a video on that one yet. Enjoy the rest of your Carnival crafters, and do enjoy your art journaling.